So the fifth theme is going to be very similar to what we were just talking about with the United States, which is the theme of breaking up of the European Union and the dissolution of the NATO military alliance. So the United Nations, or the European Union, I've heard it been called the prison of nations, because the nations are required to abide by laws and regulations and are restricted in certain ways that are actually hurtful to their own countries and own economies. They have to abide by certain rules that are bad for them. And what's going to happen with the EU nations, it's going to start to come down to a cost-benefit analysis. Is it worth being told what to do by unelected bureaucrats in Brussels that we should do this because we have to be a part of this bigger group? And is it against our national interest to do a certain policy? So there has also been, so that's going to be a theme, this growing questioning of European nations is this even worth it being in the European Union? We have to come up with a new kind of structure where I can travel to other countries that are neighboring me, but I don't have to be in this economic and military bloc of the EU and NATO. We're going to be seeing more of rejection of the European Union. Brexit already happened, but you can see the United Kingdom is still so intertwined with the European nations. And there's calls from other nations about questioning their EU membership. I think that's going to continue. And part of this is a long resistance that has been there, but a kind of more mainstream resistance to unlimited immigration into Europe. And some countries are kind of quietly trying to close their borders, similar to what Trump did. Germany is starting to look at restricting access of their borders, and also Hungary and Britain are openly talking about, calming down some of the immigration. But I think that it's nothing like what Trump did, which is making the border wall and stopping all border crossings completely. I think those are all just kind of political postures. And even last week, I'm seeing that people are crossing the English Channel in boats at record numbers. And so I don't think the actual immigration is slowing down as much as they would like to say in the European Union. And we talked a lot about why the era of Neptune and Pisces created this kind of porous coexist ideology, spurned on this utopian vision. We talked a lot about all that already. But now we're going to be seeing this Aries impulse to be looking after one's own self-interests at the expense of what other people or other societies want from us, or what may be popular or socially acceptable. And so it's too late. It's basically too late for Europe to be just closing its borders. There's tens of millions of new people in these countries. It's not going to affect the people who are already there unless they do mass deportations, which I doubt they could. But all of the influx of the people from non-European countries that have come into European countries, this is going to be rising in religious conflict, which is what I'm going to talk about in the next theme. But back to the idea of the European Union fracturing, you can start to see this coming out daily in these past weeks, is that all the member countries are being called to give 5% of their GDP to defense spending. And it's actually not even full 5%, because they can spending on roads counts towards that. So it's only like 3.5% that they're supposed to be committing to for defense spending, because the United States doesn't want to do that anymore. But most of these countries can't do that. But they're being told that they have to do it to be a part of their group. But it's against their national interest. They can't contribute that. So you have an immediate conflict, cost-benefit analysis. Is it worth being in the EU if our country is suffering because of it? So with Neptune and Aries, this kind of collectivist thinking of sacrificing one's own interests for the interests of others is just not going to be holding up for very much longer. Aries is the most individualistic sign, and breaking free and doing what one wants to do and going one's own way despite the risks, and a project like the European Union is slowly going to erode in importance and in power. And you can see this also by their failure to defend Ukraine and to install Ukraine into NATO. And now Russia is totally more powerful than it was even a few years ago. It's taking all of eastern and southern Ukraine. It's in that process. And it's a complete failure on this massive NATO and European Union's part. They're losing this of what they're desiring, even as this massive collective that is supposedly more powerful because they're all united. And to tie this in a little bit with kind of inner societal conflict, is that the last time Neptune was in one of Mars's signs was when Mars was in Scorpio from 1957 to 1970. And this was an era of massive social conflict and geopolitical conflict. And it was a time of soul searching, which led to conflict. And so there were cultural revolutions. You had the hippie movement, so much social unrest, the war in Vietnam. And this was a time for deep soul searching in the United States. And you saw the hard power of interventionist wars like in Vietnam. But there was this soft power cultural revolution that was done through social engineering, through music and through culture. And there was so much. It was a very tumultuous time. Well, Neptune was in one of Mars's signs, Scorpio. But that was more of a time of the Scorpio kind of inner psychological reform that was happening within the country, kind of a era of psychoanalysis. But it was also the rise of a lot of mainstreaming of social engineering to psychologically manipulate people's minds into following a certain social connection, social consensus. But there was all framed in conflict. Now that Neptune is in Mars's other sign, Aries, there's going to be this conflict as I'm talking about, but a more direct approach to handling these conflicts. And it's not going to be so much about psychological warfare and convincing other people and psychoanalysis and the change that comes from psychoanalysis, but more of fundamental, direct material change, like how the last time Neptune was in Aries, the Civil War was a fundamental on-the-ground, rubber meets the road war, where there's no kind of fights about beliefs happening. So I don't believe that the soft power through the media and attempting to convince people that certain policies are good for them, basically social engineering, all of that is losing power. But what governments and corporations are increasingly going to be doing is using the jackboot in your face method, ignoring the citizens, ignoring the customer, and using direct suppression of dissent through the use of force. And that's what you're seeing in the European Union, is just not allowing Marie Le Pen to run in the presidential election. They just had more power than her. They're preventing her from running. Their dissent, it's a political motivation to prevent her from gaining power. They just suppress the dissent. They just suppress the candidate. Raw power. They had the power to do it. They did it. It doesn't matter that journalists criticized it. And so you see, it's that raw power that is the most important. And you can also see it in the context of the Russian NATO war, because all the propaganda, all the mind games, all the social engineering said Russia is caught off its guard. They're about to lose any day now, any month. They're always losing. That's all what the media reports on. But it's untrue, and now Russia is taking territory by the day. And so what this shows is that it doesn't matter about what your propaganda is. What matters is the actual force you have on the ground. What is the actual power you have? In this way, the European Union lost. And because it didn't matter what they said, it wasn't reality. It was a break from the narrative. The narrative didn't reflect the reality, and they're going to lose the war. And their narratives on the topics just don't matter anymore, that they're so strong, that they're going to invade Russia eventually, they're going to build up the military. Okay, what's the real industrial capacity? What is the real situation? So the European Union is really seeing they're in a very bad situation economically, and just the strength of their union, because they just don't have the raw resources to enact the projects that they want to do. And there's so many levels to their kind of fracturing. I can't go into too much about the details, and I want to stick to the theme, which is essentially that the EU is trying to rally their countries behind marching into Russia. And despite that being against their own self-interest, they don't want to fight in Russia. And so what this is going to lead to is further implosions within the European Union countries, more economic depressions, localized economic situations, as like you see in Spain, of certain like housing market, the explosion of home costs. And what this is going to do is, from this European Union desire to fight Russia, which is really the bankers of the City of London wanting to control the resources of Ukraine and Russia. It's nothing having to do with what they say it is, but that major desire being at complete odds with what's happening on the ground in the specific European Union countries. So that disconnect is going to cause this fracturing of the European Union slowly, and then with quicker and quicker pace as this transit goes on, and a heating up, I think, of revolutionary sentiment across Europe. And you can see with this Neptunian Aries energy that the major European Union nations saying that, okay, we don't care if the United States is no longer going to be a part of our NATO. We're going to go it alone, and we're going to build up this army, and we're hell-bent on doing this project. Okay, they can, try that out, but you can kind of see that same energy within them. Oh, it doesn't matter. Okay, we lost the U.S. support, so we're going to do this on our own. We're going to fight this war. And that is fighting Russia is going to become such a major problem for them if they actually continue going on that path. Because Russia is so strong, and they even asked to be a part of NATO in the 90s. Putin asked Bill Clinton that, to be a part of NATO. They are so much more focused on cooperation and long-term trade. But the European Union seem hell-bent on demonizing Russia against their own economic interests, and that's what the key theme is. And so it's going to be important for the individual European nations to start to identify what their national interests are, to work towards bettering the conditions on the ground for themselves, and to empower themselves to be more self-sufficient and not dependent upon the European Union in an unhealthy way, as what's been happening. And I've been saying that that's what Aries is all about. It's about self-empowerment and independence of action, not depending on other people. There's going to be this deep-seated desire to become more like that, and that is going to lead to the gradual breakup of these European nations. So underlying all of that is the Neptunian desire for a deeper connection with the rebel mentality, to embrace conflict and enact real change, whether that is misguided or not. And Europe is in this very confused kind of state right now, where the leaders are rebelling in their own way. The people are seeing the reality on the ground, that their interventionist policies aren't helping them. And so you're going to see this kind of deepening of individuals thinking of what is key for us. What is most important for us? Is World War III most important for us? No, getting our on-the-ground reality in a better situation is the most important thing for us.